Hello, hi everyone. Thank you for joining another Experience Matters show. Welcome. We have Vivish with us today. Let me start with a brief intro, right? So Vivish has been in the market research industry in India across APAC for the last 20 years now. As far as I you've got 6 leadership roles across your
Yep.
tenure in the industry. So just a wealth of knowledge and experience, and he's here with us today to share all of that experience with everyone who's joined. Vivish, thank you so much for joining, for taking the time to do the show with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shibani. And good to be on the
How,
show. And yeah,
yeah. How's it going? You're in Bombay now?
yes,
Yes.
Bombay.
Enjoying the humid weather.
It's getting better though. It's getting
Yeah,
better.
I'm in Bangalore, so I'm allowed to say that we don't have humid weather. We just have awesome weather all the time.
Cool. That's
But
nice.
you're coming to Bangalore in a few days, so you'll get to enjoy the weather very soon.
Yeah. Look
Awesome.
forward. Yeah.
Awesome. Do you have any other plans apart from Bangalore the next, month or so? Are you going to be
There is
traveling
a
anywhere?
Delhi plan,
Oh,
but
no.
once it, and of course, one further south to see my mom. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. So we've actually got a few people joined us already. Shall we kick this off, Vivish?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Perfect. So, for everyone who joined, just a quick reminder as well. Post your comments, post your questions in the comment section. We'll be happy to answer those on the live show itself. In case you need any further details, please feel free to reach out to us. You've got all of our details, and we will share Vivish's details as well. So you can reach out to him for his expert advice post the show as well. So the agenda for today is in and around, the research in the CX space with all of the projects that you're running within the organization. Once the data comes in, you've identified those areas, you understand what is not doing well. But there might be, 5, 6 areas, there could be 10 areas that you want and you need to improve on in the company, right? But how do you go from there? What is the next step and what happens post the responses and the feedback coming in, right? So the whole action planning space, that is our agenda and what we'll be talking about today. Vivish is, of course, an expert. He runs multiple of these sessions with, large scale, mid scale companies across India and APAC. Vivish, over to you. Do you want to walk us through what goes into, like you said, experience and beyond?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Shibani. And I think this is a fantastic platform on experience that you've actually put up.
Thank
And I
you.
think having seen a couple of them in the past, I think you covered very well the transactional and the relationship
Mm.
process that
Mm.
happens when you measure experience. So I
Yeah.
think that's very critical, and I'm sure many of them would have also seen those. But taking it from there, I think it's important to therefore see what we do with that kind of data. And there's so much of data that
Yeah.
everybody has, but how do you kind of make sense out of it, actionable and meaningful for the organization and the client, right?
Yep.
So I think taking it from there, I think it's important to see today how behavior is also changing. There are a lot of
Mm.
new things happening, so you are changing the entire lifestyle of the customer or the
Yep.
consumers, and therefore we are also focused on getting the experiential data and the behavior data that is important to measure rather than just the perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Perceptions are critical to build on the brand and all of that, but I think also in terms of changing behavior, a lot of
Mm.
studies are happening. So I think in that context, if you look at it today, when you get a brief, you actually use that as a discussion guide to actually talk to the stakeholders in the company, right? The various
Yep.
stakeholders across
Mm-hmm.
functions, so that you are able to get and develop the research instruments or the methodology itself more meaningful, so that the outcome is powerful and helpful
Yep.
to the organization. So I think the entire uh, focus on that is going to be in the next 20-25 minutes. I will go through that.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that the data is very omnipresent now, you need to also know what to pick up and therefore what is going to make sense. So the when you talk to all of these stakeholders, you get a rich experience of what they're doing, what their challenges are, and what their plans are. And that's
Mm.
critical to have it because all of it may not be coming into a written brief, right?
Yep.
So that part which has now started happening is very good. And so therefore the outcome also has to be that much more powerful to all of those stakeholders, not just the research users or the research
Mm.
division within the company. So taking that, I think it's important, therefore, to set KPIs and ROIs basis when you start off the project. And therefore, it's looking beyond the experience of the consumers and all of that. It's going to be very, very critical.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go through that and
Yep.
to just set the context. I think what we're trying to do is decode and validate the outcomes towards growth, right?
Yep.
Now, you have a lot of companies have many programs running. It could be a
Mm.
brand track, it could be a loyalty, it could be a experiential program, all of that, or of course a CX as well, which is part of that. So I think when you look at it, uh, there could be a very simple brief, right? Now I have a NPS of 10. How do I grow it?
Mm.
Now it's a very common question,
Mm.
and the answers are so many and it's so diverse because the actionability depends on very different sets of consumers, right? And you
Yep.
might end up having about 70% of the audience sitting in the passives. So what do you
Yeah.
do? How do you move them up, right? That is a
Mm.
constant struggle. And even if you get a feedback on the go, you need to also
Yep.
see how relevant that feedback is. For example, I might go into a site and search for something and it says it's not available. I'll
Mm.
come out and give it a 4 or a 5 rating on 5 just because I didn't waste time there, right?
Yeah.
But will I go
Mm.
back? So a
Yeah.
lot of questions come and it could be very uh, different across the usage or the need as well. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, it's important to get into a lot more diagnostics. And this is not something that's done regularly. It's depending on the need, or it could be biannual or annual. But I think it's important to have these kinds of exercise done so that the entire organization comes together. And most of this gets sorted when you go on your market visits, whether it's a
Yeah.
consumer home visits or your retailer trade visits. I think that also helps to get a good grinding on the answers. But to get into putting it into action, I think a lot of data is required beyond just a few visits because that can also be a little biased, misleading, and all of that.
Got
So,
it.
so understanding and enhancing the project outcomes, like we've talked about, the stakeholders are key. We need to understand all of what they're looking for
Yeah.
and then getting into the details and action points. So that's where we're looking at how do we kind of build a kind of a program or kind of a various levels of how do you get into doing this, right?
Yep.
So moving on, I think you have a lot of data, like I said. So you would have various studies running. You could have uh, projects that are going to happen, all of that, or even data that's coming into your platforms. So
Mm.
all of that is there. So and then you have the data. So how do you get insights, no doubt, but how do you make it meaningful and actionable? Like for example, you're moving your passives to promoters is not that easy, right?
Mm.
So those kinds of things. So you look at the input data is there. So you need to pick up from that what is going to be relevant to answer your objectives and the needs of all the various stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
Then accordingly, you could have various kinds of people. Passives
Mm-hmm.
is one. There could be lapsers. There could be people who are also promoters, strongly loyal to the brand, all kinds of segments. So you pick up various segments and you design something that will be very task based. Like,
Mm.
what are their pain points? You're trying to understand pain points and understand a solve which the company can then come back with, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
kind of create a program as to which is you do a qualitative in the second stage where you kind of use these inputs that have come into the data and create tasks. So it could
Mm-hmm.
be you ask them to kind of do a shopping experience on the phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you record it, and then you give them tasks as to pick up various things. So then you kind of what you know the behavior of how it's happening. You can track it at the back end, but then you can quiz them as to why they did what they did and why
Yeah.
and how. So all of that is possible. So that's the idea of this. While I'm not saying there's no the data is available with us, but we need to kind of understand why it's being done that way or why not some other way. So I think this on-ground diagnostics is very critical, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore, once you have that piece in, the second piece in, you need to then connect the dots. Like you have the synthesizing of A and B, all the data that is in, and then what the outcomes are from the diagnostics that you've done from various
Mm-hmm.
sets of consumers, because their needs are different, they are culturally very different as well. So those kinds of parameters also need to be focused on. I remember a client telling me, I need to know what's the ask in this part of the city, right?
Yeah.
Because we have a very different community living in that. It's very popular for a particular type of community. So we need to map by communities the various
Mm.
regions of metros, and we need to see
Yeah.
what we can move there. So
Yeah.
the products that you kind of line up will change. So, and that is very critical when you kind of have a very huge distribution chain, or even
Yeah.
on a platform. If you're logging in from a particular uh, pin code, for example,
Mm-hmm.
then the kind of things that you start seeing are very different from someone who sees it from somewhere else or
Mm-hmm.
the neighborhood. So I think those kinds of challenges can be sorted if you kind of sort your uh, pages right? So
Got it.
those can
Actually,
also
I
help.
have I have a question here, Vivish. So, in terms of at least for the first three steps, right? How do you go about identifying this? Are you going to be taking, within market, like you mentioned, there could be multiple studies that are running from a market research perspective and then from a CX perspective. So, um, are you looking at each of those programs individually, identifying those areas of feedback that need to be improved on, tying it in with the diagnostics, and or are you looking at it from an overall company level, picking and choosing the most important from all of these areas? What is the best practice there?
See, I think, for example, when you're talking to the stakeholders, you have somebody from the marketing. So he has
Mm-hmm.
some communication issues that he has to address, or a brand perception that he needs to build. Whereas somebody in the product line wants to know what kind of a variant will work or not work, what can I innovate.
Yeah.
So it's a very
Mm.
different ask, right? And they have different kinds of studies that they have done, or they have new plans that are coming up for the next quarter or the year. So we need
Mm.
to kind of pick up those. That is why you also have an NPD there, you have a communication, you have a
Yeah.
loyalty as
Mm.
well. You can also look
Mm.
at secondary data to see what competition is doing or what
Got it.
similar categories are doing globally. So you can
Mm.
kind of come back with ideas, right? So
Got it.
that's the
Mm.
input data that can be. And when you're doing the diagnostic call, you pick up consumers who are of varied segments, and
Mm.
then find out what are their pain points or what are the challenges, and quiz
Mm-hmm.
them, giving them tasks to solve,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Got it.
then you kind of bring both together by various functions or departments or the quest objectives that you have. And this
Mm-hmm.
could be a mix of both the primary data that you have or you've got, or also from the secondary data that is available in market. So you
Mm-hmm.
synthesize both of that. Now the next step is you have your uh, ideas as to what can be done or how it can be done, or
Mm-hmm.
what is the alternative that you can give for a particular problem. So then you kind of get into a workshop, and this is going to be very critical because it's for the organization. And the organization, when I say organization, you need to understand what is the root cause,
Mm.
because consumers may not be able to say what is they might be able to tell you what the challenges are, but they may not be able to tell you why. But
Yeah.
within the company they'll be able to figure out what was the challenge and why that's not happening. So yeah, for example, your frequent flyer points, for example,
Mm.
all of it. So I'm saying there could be some challenges, right? So you need to kind of understand what is happening, and normally you will get to understand the root cause of what's the problem and then try and address that. Because if it's a matter of communication, it's very simple. Or if it's a matter of uh, changing something within your website, it's fine. But if it's something beyond that, then you need to kind of get into understanding what the solves or the issues are.
Yeah.
For example, it could be something that it could be a product that somebody is selling or talking about to a customers, but he or she has not herself used the product,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then it
Yeah.
becomes a challenge. So the questions that are asked are difficult to solve. Then you might just end up losing customers. So the training can be very critical, and training on the products that the customer is asking. Otherwise, today you have specialized teams that work on very different kinds of product verticals, all of that. Okay, so that's one. And we also found that when you talk about the CPG category, I think it's very critical. At one point in time, we used to find, I mean, that it's very critical for the people to have trial packs,
Okay.
right?
Mm.
So which
Yeah.
is very easy on an online platform. So what do, right? Do you
Mm.
send them
Yeah.
something to then try and then pick it up? So
Mm.
there's a time process. In that time, they might change the mind. So all of that. So
Yeah.
it's a very so every category has its own dynamics, and
Mm.
that's something that we need to bring into the context. And that's why I'm saying. So the client team is very solid on the category and what they're doing, what they want to do, and they know the products and the consumers. But we also have a new trend that's happening where people are the owners of the company are very passionate about the product, especially if it's a tech product, but may not be
Mm-hmm.
very savvy about the market and the consumers, for example, at least when they're getting started, which is very critical.
Yeah.
Now, the second point is that then you get into understanding the ground level of the issues there. Then you also bring in the consumers issues. So
Mm-hmm.
when you bring that together, then you're able to solve problems, right? So then you're able to set KPIs and responsibilities and a timeline so that things work around. So
Yeah.
that is the entire chain of how do you go about doing it. So let me then, if you don't have any questions on this, let me then
Yeah.
move on to, yeah. So the diagnostics is one is about knowing the customer, like I said. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
understand their profile, you need to understand what is their need and their service, and then the behavior in terms of what they use, how they use it, and the challenges therefore. So you need to get that piece in, and then you
Mm-hmm.
kind of identify the task-based program, and then it's very simple. It's not. Don't make it too complicated again,
Mm.
because then they're not going to go back and use it. It has to be simple, and it has to. You have multiple ways of recording it. You can have eye tracker, you can have facial coding, all of that, to kind of complement to see what the response is and the behavior is, and analyzing that. Today you have very specialized people analyzing such data like anthropologists and very specific domains coming in into this. So it's a it's evolving as we speak. So it's a very good place to be in today. And
Yeah.
also there are a lot of compliance issues which may or may not be intended, but the consumer is not aware. So you might
Mm.
want to flash it on the screen, right?
Yeah.
So those are things. And then the connecting of the dots, the workshop.
Mm. Yeah.
Now, when we do these solve workshops, I call it solve because the idea is to solve as many problems as you can and give them a way of a plan of action kind of a thing so that it's workable. So, what we do is we kind of sit together separately with the senior management
Mm-hmm.
who have given us these issues because their way of planning for the company, the market, and all of it will be very different. And also with the implementation teams, right? Because they are the owners of it at the end of the day, and
Yeah.
they know challenges that might happen because then they may not even voice it at times, but it
Yeah.
comes through when you kind of ask them surrogate questions and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that will help you to get to the root cause. Therefore, you're able
Absolutely.
to in the forum you're able to share success stories, learnings, best practices. Then therefore they understand, okay, it's not that I need to work on this alone. I have a similar people having similar problems or similar
Yeah.
issues. So how do we kind of get together to address that? And also, therefore, the management is able to prioritize budgets very differently. We've seen
Yeah.
that happen, or even resource allocation gets very different after you do this entire exercise. So it's not just limited to the data, but it goes beyond into the entire P&L and all of that. So that helps towards getting to your goal of strengthening the loyalty and increasing your share, right? So because you at the end of the day you want to increase your NPS.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
want
And I Yeah,
you
and I
want
think without having both, right? Sorry, it had cut off. Without having both sets of, senior management as well as on ground. If senior management wasn't there, the company's directive, the strategy, like you said, the source allocation, you're going to lose out on all of that and probably get skewed towards, prioritizing something that is not important for the company. And then if you don't have your on ground, you're not going to get the on ground reality, right? The what is actually
correct.
happening and how it affects your customers and the employees who are actually dealing with the customers on a daily basis because they know what the customers are going through, right? So and
True.
but yeah, so that for most of the workshops at least that you've been running, you've had both your senior management as well as on ground people that
Yeah.
are part of it, right? And what about the tech aspect as well? Do you have people from the product team? Is
Yes.
Are they also typically involved? Okay.
Yeah. It's everybody. You get the entire what all the functions represented.
Mhm.
Otherwise, there is something that's missing, right? But
Yeah.
the beauty of this is when you do this, and then you come back with the findings. Actually, all of them get to see a lot of surprises because there are some priorities which both are common across both, but there are very crucial areas where they differ as well,
Yeah.
right? So therefore, it's important. Therefore, they then start prioritizing the budget and resource allocation and training and all of that. So it's a very useful exercise, and it helps to kind of also bring the organization together, bring in that kind of learning together,
Yeah.
right? So that's very important. So how we do
Is
about it is,
is there a best practice in terms of the number of people who should be a part of this, or does it not matter at all? Everyone's coming to and aiming towards the same goal, so it doesn't matter, or is it too many cooks for the broad kind of situation?
okay, the it's not that. I think at the end of the day, it's about so senior management is fine. You don't have
Yeah.
too many people there,
Yeah.
but when it comes to certain companies, the way they're structured, they have regional teams, right? So
Hmm.
then you have multiple people. So then what we do is we do it region wise. You
Okay.
could have a south versus a north, and the priorities can be very different, right? So we've had even 40, 50 people at one shot. But if it
Okay.
all had to come together, it would have been 200 people. But
Mm.
that would have become too many. But yeah,
Hmm.
40 was still good and manageable.
Got
So
it.
then you have the fishbone kind of analysis that we do with the root cause thing. Now just imagine, okay, there could be various issues that you could solve here, which if you look at the loyalty CX as one part, where if you take like I was saying, the NPS score, you want to increase
Hmm.
that. You could have multiple things that come in. But let's imagine this, if you were to solve this for cabbies who cancel trips,
Hmm.
right? Like all of us will be able to relate to it. But trying to understand from the cabbies who kind of cancel trips or don't cancel trips and the management, imagine how this will look like. It will be very, very different, right? And you might actually have a reason, they have a very good reason to do what they're doing,
Hmm.
and therefore build
Absolutely.
something else and then go back to the consumer, I mean, the one who's booking and say, okay, this is the reason, or avoid some guys from picking it up. So you could actually have solves for that. And today, it's not that you're going to lose a customer because with two, three
Yeah.
operators, you get back because they may not be in your next time, the first one whom you'd go to. You might still be frustrated, but you'll go back. So it's still okay. But I think at the end of it, they're not very, you have to be first even when there are two operators, right? So
Yeah.
it's a critical thing. So I'm just saying, so this is very powerful because it tells you across various dimensions. So when you do a loyalty study, you have various pillars you measure, or
Hmm.
various functions could come in here.
Hmm.
So you could actually change each of those arrows where you have the boxes, where you have various functions. You could have various pillars of a CX program or various different things. So again, it different. This differs from the study to study, but I think the structure is pretty good. And so you kind of, from this, you take it to a SWOT analysis. So what you can do, and therefore then you pick up as to what will be the outcomes of that. So what are your opportunities and threats? And this will include both. It will have rational elements, which are your product offering features, usability, and also the emotional aspects will come in, because
Yeah.
that's going to be a big player as well for brands or different kinds of products.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll get all the triggers and white spaces, triggers and barriers, gaps, the white spaces, which will all come in because you're trying to understand. So because when you talk to especially the team that's implementing, they talk a lot about competition. Okay.
Yeah.
So because they are quite solid on that. So you kind of get to know what can be the gaps. So how do you
Yeah.
kind of fill up that? So yeah, so this very neat in that sense. And then you kind of get into each of those problems, whether let's say it's a cab cancellation, whatever, you
Yeah.
have the whys and the root causes. So for each of that, you kind of dig down or ladder down to understanding what is the actual issue. Then
Mm-hmm.
you find out from the team itself what can be the resolution.
Yeah.
And then what you do is who's responsible, which team is responsible, who in person is responsible or leading that team, and what can be the action plan. So we kind of go till there, but then the team actually comes back and says, okay, now what can we do about it, and what kind of time. So
Yeah.
then the management is happy to kind of see, okay, this is a priority, depending on whatever they see as the scores that will uplift the scores or their sales or their KPIs. So
Yeah.
then the priorities get set. So you get a full thorough action plan, and then you also have time frame to work on it. So
Mm-hmm.
that, and it's very difficult for us to handhold them at that stage, but it is important to give them a plan up to this.
Got it. Got it. Absolutely. I mean, it's just wonderful how you've broken it down, for everyone who's joined today. It is just, once that comes in, it's very clear, right, in terms of how it, and it's not something that can be done overnight. It is obviously, it takes time to build in that prioritization. It takes time to get everyone on board and have that, those strategy sessions and the root cause analysis sessions, and then of course to see the results, right, to be able to, you have platforms, and Question Pro also, you're able to track all of these initiatives, check and see what that impact is going to be. See, and once you decided, like you said, it's not a one-time thing, right? It has to be done on a regular basis. One is to track and see the existing initiatives, where it is at. Does it have the impact that they thought it is going to have? And new initiatives that need to be brought into place. So, it's a mix of product being able to do that and give visibility, for the progress of those initiatives throughout the organization, as well as people coming together and actually working upon it, and helping put those strategies and those initiatives in place. Um, so this is brilliant, Vivish. Thank you so much for sharing this. I
Yeah,
don't think we have any questions that have come up, as of now, at least on the live chat. I'm sure, once people take this back, maybe just that one thing of the step by step we can share with everyone who's joined on the call
sure.
today. And once they start implementing it, they, definitely need to come to you for advice. And there's just the nuances for each that happen within each of those different steps. Um,
Sure.
anything else that you'd like to share?
No, I think just one last point. I think when I started off in the many good days, my managers used to tell me, before you write a proposal, talk to consumers. And
Yeah,
before you write a questionnaire, talk to users, non-users, all of that. But today, when you go to conduct these, you need to go in as an expert. So you need to have a thorough knowledge of the category, the competition,
yeah.
the dynamics that are there. Because only then actually the implementation team actually starts to open up a lot more.
Hmm.
So it's very engaging and
Absolutely.
takes a lot of time to prepare for the uh, one. For
Absolutely.
the third step, which I said was the task-based stuff, actually the second one, but also for this.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's
Hmm.
a quite a to make it more meaningful. That's about it, because you need
Absolutely.
to know where to cut and say, where, okay, this is fine, but no, let's not get there. So it needs to kind of moderate that piece. But then you also have all the senior leaders within the company at that point being able to take that shots. So it's good. Good fun, actually.
Absolutely. And learn from others' mistakes, right? There's no point in repeating the same thing and following the path exactly. So,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I'm sure each of these sessions to run, like you mentioned, is a lot of work. You need to have that knowledge across industries, right?
Yeah.
In order to be able to advise. Perfect.
Sure.
Okay, I think with wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your information there. For everyone who's joined, take a screenshot of this in case you wanted to get in touch with Vivish down the line as well. If, like I mentioned before, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, to Vivish, and then we can take it from there.
Sure.
With that,
Great.
thank you everyone for joining. Big thank you to Vivish for taking this time and sharing your knowledge on this. And looking forward to having you on further Experience Matter shows down the line.
Sure. Sure. Sure,
Thank you,
Shibani. Thank you
everyone.
very much. Yeah. Bye
Enjoy
bye.
your weekend.